Hi, everybody. All right, so you're going to need to have your guided notes either printed out with a paper, with a pencil, or have your screen split with your guided notes on one side and this lecture on the other. All right, we are going to be talking about clauses today. I know we've already talked about phrases. You've learned the different types of phrases, at least when it comes to prepositional phrases, and they can act as adjectives or they can act as adverbs. So today we're going to be talking about clauses, which are very different from phrases. And your goal today is to be able to identify the types of clauses: independent, dependent, noun, relative, or adverbial clauses. All right. We'll focus on the phrases in just reviewing them very briefly later on. Okay, so let's review our parts of speech here because that is really important. A noun, of course, is a person, place, or thing, can also be an emotion. Okay, an adjective describes a noun. It always will describe a noun. A verb is an action or a state of being. The state of being or are identified using verbs such as is, am, are, was, were, will be. An adverb describes a verb or can also describe an adjective, such as using really or very or quickly. Those are adverbs that describe adjectives. Really old, right? Old is an adjective. Really is describing the adjective, but it is still an adverb. Prepositions show a relationship in time, space, or location between two things. We also say that it is anything an airplane can do to a cloud. But remember, there are some trickier ones like of and for. A participle. A participle is a verb that is actually behaving like an adjective. Okay, we didn't really go over those very much. Those weren't part of our original 8 parts of speech. But one of the ones that isn't here that we did go over are conjunctions, and we're going to be talking about subordinating conjunctions today when it comes to clauses. So you have your conjunctions that are coordinating. Such as the fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. And then you have your correlative conjunctions, which are like the neither, nor, or both, and. And then you have your subordinating conjunctions, which we're going to be talking about today. And there will be a little song that will help you memorize those. That if you memorize that song, it's really going to help you out. Okay, so let's review how we talk about sentences, okay? Sentences are either complete or they're fragments. If you have a complete sentence, it means you have a subject and a predicate. A predicate is another way of saying a verb. For those of you that had me way back in the day, I think I showed you Mr. Morton is the subject of the sentence, and what the predicate says he does, right? So the predicate is the verb, it's the action. Okay, a complete sentence is also called an independent clause. All right, that's just an introduction there. So, complete sentence is also called an independent clause. All right, then you have fragments. Fragments mean that you're missing something. Okay, maybe you have a subject, maybe you have a predicate, but something is missing. Either you've only written a phrase, which means that you don't have a subject and you don't have a verb, or you've written a dependent clause, which this will make more sense later on when I talk about what dependent clauses are. Okay, so let's get into our clauses. Before we begin, I do want you guys to go ahead and pause this video and go to the slide in your grammar notebook on the subordinate conjunction song. Okay, so go ahead and pause that now. Go back over and read through that song. Okay, so now that you're back, you've read through the song and hopefully you have it kind of going in your head, but it goes like this. Subordinate conjunctions I love and I adore. There's after, although, as, because, and before, if, provided, since, unless, until, and then there's wherever, whenever, while, and where, and when. All right, if you can remember those, then you can remember your subordinating conjunctions, which are really going to help you out here. All right, let's talk about our clauses. Clauses, we have 2 types. We have independent and we have dependent. Before we even get into that, I need to tell you what the difference between a clause and a phrase is. We have already talked about phrases. You've been tested on that. So let's refresh. What makes a phrase a phrase? What does it have or what does it not have? Right. Phrases do not have subjects and they do not have verbs. The specific types of phrases that we spoke about, prepositional phrases, start with a preposition. Those are phrases. Clauses are different than phrases because clauses do have a subject and do have a verb. Okay. In order for it to be considered a clause, it has to have a subject and a verb, or also known as a predicate. Okay. So now let's look at these as the two types of clauses we have. We have an independent clause. That's a complete sentence. It means that it has a subject and a predicate, and it's a complete thought. Now, sometimes this is really tricky for people because they go, well, how do I know when my thought is complete? And that's really going to come with us practicing more and you reading more. I can't say that enough. You need to read more. You should be reading at least 15 minutes every single day. All right, read something for fun, but make sure that it's something that's published so that you know that the grammar is correct. But yeah, it's a complete thought. So let's look at the examples. The dog is adorable. I have the subject dog and I have the verb is. And it's a complete thought. I'm telling the person what I think. The dog is adorable. Now, if I just wrote the dog is, that's not complete. That's not a complete thought, right? So that would be considered a fragment sentence. You were late. We have the subject you and we have the verb were. And I'm telling you a complete thought. What were you? You were late. All right. Now we have dependent clauses. These are fragments. These also have a subject and a verb, but they're not a complete thought. And usually, here's where your song is going to come into play here. Usually, a dependent clause will start with a subordinating conjunction. All right. Or a relative pronoun. All right, relative pronouns. If you're not sure what relative pronouns are, I highly recommend that you go to my YouTube channel and watch my grammar lesson on advanced pronouns. It was in my English 1 class, but you are welcome to watch them if you can't remember what a relative pronoun is. But relative pronouns are who, whom, whose, that, and which. All right, so let's take a look at the examples we have. Although the dog is adorable, you can hear there that that's not a complete thought. And it's that subordinating conjunction that makes it not a complete thought. Although what? You're waiting for more information. So therefore, we call that a fragment. A dependent clause is a fragment. Because you were late, again, you can sense the fact that that's not a complete thought because of the subordinating conjunction. Because there, you're waiting for more information. All right, so what I like to tell my students is when you think of clauses, I want you to think of the independent clause like that independent mom. A mom doesn't really need anyone to help her out. She's got this, she's independent, right? She doesn't need anyone else to help her figure out life. The dependent clause is like a baby, a toddler, right? They are not independent. They cannot go without something else. They need their mom. They need that independent clause to be complete and to be considered a sentence, okay, or part of a sentence. So the dependent clause is the baby. It needs something else to be complete. And the independent clause is the mom. It doesn't need anything else to be complete. It's all good. All right. So now, if you have a dependent clause, you have to ask yourself, what is this acting like? Is this acting like a noun? Is it acting like an adverb? Or is it acting like a relative clause? So if it's acting like a noun, a group of words that act together as a subject or an object. The burrito I ate for lunch was amazing. Okay, we have the burrito I ate for lunch as a dependent clause. All right, now that is a dependent clause because if I just took that out by itself, the burrito I ate for lunch, what about it? That's not complete, right? And because it's at that beginning part, it's kind of acting like the subject of the sentence. What was amazing? The burrito I ate for lunch. So we call that a noun clause. A little trick here is if you can replace it with the word it, and it still makes grammatical sense, then it is a noun clause. So if I can replace the entire dependent clause with the word it, and it still makes sense, then we consider that a noun clause. So for example, I could say, it was amazing, and that still is grammatically correct. I can also look at the next one, I forgave it, or I forgave them, the plural, right? And that still makes sense. His only regret was it. It was his only regret. That still makes sense. It will advance, or they will advance to the semifinals. Okay, so when you can replace it with it or they or them, then it's a noun because it's either acting as the subject or the object of a sentence. Okay? All right. Let's take a look at if it's acting like an adverb. If it's acting like an adverb, then it's telling you why, how, or to what extent the verb about the action. Okay? So I know the game ended. How did you know the game ended? When the buzzer rings. Okay? You can't eat cookies. Why? Until you finish your homework. That's telling us why you can't eat cookies, why you can't eat, the action of eating. Okay? And a relative clause just basically helps us specify more information about the noun that usually comes before it. So I want the sundae, that comes with sprinkles. So we can say I want the sundae, and we can stop there. But we've used a relative clause that comes with sprinkles to help give more information about the sundae. We bought it at the farmer's market, which also sells flowers. So I could stop at we bought it at the farmer's market, but I want to give more information about which farmer's market. So I use a relative clause that says the farmer's market, which also sells flowers. So just remember, relative clauses start with relative pronouns. They will have a verb and they will have a predicate, they will have a subject, okay? And they will relate more information about the word that usually comes right before it. Okay? So always look up here at my box here. When you're thinking of independent clauses, when you're trying to find a dependent clause, you want to watch out for your subordinating conjunctions and your relative pronouns because you know those are going to start a dependent clause. All right. So we have our identifying clauses here. I can't go to the game unless I finish my homework first. I can't go to the game unless I finish my homework first. I can't go to the game, which is an epic championship. I can't go to the only game of the season that I care about. Now, I want you guys to pause this here and identify where the clauses are. You should have this on your guided notes if you've printed it out, or you can do it digitally if you're keeping them online. So pause this video now. Okay, so here we go. I can't go to the game unless I finish my homework first. Now we have I can't go to the game as it's bolded, and I want to know if that's independent or dependent. And I can take that out and put a period behind it, and it still is a complete sentence, complete thought. I can't go to the game. So therefore we call that an independent clause. In the second one, I have I finish my homework first. If I take that out by itself and I say, I finished my homework first, that's not a complete thought. What about finishing your homework first? I still am left with questions. That's not complete. So that is dependent. And I know that it's dependent because I have the subordinate conjunction unless before it. Now I'm asking you to tell me if it's an adverb, a relative, or a noun clause. And this is an adverb clause. And the reason why is because it's telling you, it's answering the question, why? Why can't you go to the game? Okay, so because it's answering the question why, it is an adverb. Number 3, I can't go to the game, which is an epic championship. So we have the bolded, which is an epic championship. That's not a complete sentence by itself. If I pulled that out and said, which is an epic championship, and put a period behind it, that's not complete. I still have questions. So therefore, that bolded part is a dependent clause. Okay, now, what type of dependent clause is it? Well, when I look at the word there that starts the dependent clause, which is not one of my subordinate conjunctions for my song, and I know that it's a relative pronoun. And if it's a relative pronoun that starts the dependent clause, well then that's a relative dependent clause. Okay, so that word in pink is really what's going to tell you whether or not this is an adverb or a relative clause. Okay. Number 4, I can't go to the only game of the season that I care about. All right, we have the bolded, the only game of the season that I care about. If I were to take that out by itself, put a period behind it, that's not a complete sentence. I can't come to you and say, the only game of the season that I care about. You would look at me and say, what about it? Right? I need more information, not a complete thought. So it is dependent. Now, I look at the beginning word. It says the. Well, I know that that's not a subordinate conjunction, and I know that that's not a relative pronoun. So what I'm left with is more than likely this is a noun clause. And I can do my it trick that I told you about. I can't go to it. Does that still make grammatical sense? Yes, it does. And because it does, I would call this a dependent noun clause. All right, let's go ahead and pause this video here, you guys. Make sure that all of your guided notes are filled in, and come back to this in a bit.